Well, that I will leave to our esteemed author here. Um, Thank you for joining us. It's perfect on time and folk tales, and this is like the like evening time. थोड़ा चाय पे चर्चा वाली बात है, तो हम वैसे ही करेंगे इसको. We will break into Hindi and English, I guess, because we're talking about Bollywood. We will keep it informal, and then we would invite you to join in, because this is storytelling doesn't happen as a one-way process. I really feel happy and privileged and also honored because Priyanka Sinha was my first boss. And we are just discussing that. I mean, in media, we don't use the term boss, it's more of a corporate term. But when I joined Society magazine as a reporter, she was my editor. And I've learned a lot from her. And she used to be a tough boss, but now in retrospect, I see that it has made me a good writer and a journalist. And once I started, she first sent me 3 excerpts from the book, and those teasers from the various stories were literally like trailers. So already like I'm talking in cinematic terms, and because again Priyanka's own long stint as HT style editor, then screen. So it's a compelling book. I will highly recommend it. It's written in a very easy, relatable style, but most importantly, also from my own years in the reporting for Stardust, and then I was editor, there is a certain lingo and a certain feel about the Bombay industry that very few people, very few books, fiction books, have been able to capture. Once you start reading, and I guarantee you start with the first story itself, it will be unputdownable. Without much ado, I would straight away like to jump into this conversation. And I think Bollywood, arguably, I believe, is also a popular fable or a folktale of our times. And how did you think of this title itself, folktales? And how did that come about?
Thank you, Piyush. I'm so glad that we are doing this session together, and I'm nervous, you know. But let me explain to you. Folktales of Bollywood, actually, when I started writing the story, uh, I didn't have the title in mind at that point. But as I sort of embarked on the journey and found my characters and the situations that I was setting them up in, and I got deeper into the writing process, I wanted it to be a little, what should I say? I wanted it to be a story which was not dark, you know. It was chatpata, so to speak, with a little bit of tinge of mischief mixed in the narrative and the storytelling, but not spiteful or not dark really. Also because remember that this thought came to me during the lockdown, and as journalists who have written about celebrities, you would know this, that very often people come up to you and ask you like, "Acha, tell me, is this true? Ye maine suna hai, is this true?" And during the lockdown, we had the opportunity to connect a lot more with family and friends. We had all the time on earth. We were talking to people, engaging with them. They wanted, and everybody wanted to take the minds of things, and they always ask you about stuff. And so since I didn't really want to, tell them falsehoods about any actual person, and that's not something I condone or I appreciate or endorse. So I just thought that let me just spin some interesting narratives which are work of fiction set in this world of Bollywood, which fascinates everybody. For some reason, everybody wants to know every last detail. And so it got started like that. Since it would be about that life, the people in that world, that landscape of Bollywood. So therefore, folks, and also the tonality of it being light-hearted, mischievous, not really dark, therefore, folk tales, because folk tales typically, takes that narrative style. And then again, because those examples, um, folk tales are also tales that live long after the actual happening of something, right? And they're told and retold. They're very universal occurrences, in that sense. So, because these are also the stories revolve around some very universal occurrences that are peculiar to this world, you know. So, therefore, it came about as folk tales of Bollywood.
And as you rightly said, because the narrative has a very grandma telling story element to it, and I think what touched me about your characters is that um, they are relatable because we normally tend to see stars like up there, and that's why we are curious and we want to gossip about them. But they come across as very human people battling with. It's just that they happen to be in that context, and perhaps that's where you being privy to seeing them up close through so many opportunities as an editor and also while organizing screen awards, that actually comes. So what was the trigger? I mean, there are 10 stories. Which was the first one you wrote, and then how did you pan out these characters from there?
It's interesting you asked me which was the first one. What happens is that sometimes there are these people, these memories that stick in your mind, or some events or something that you've heard. And obviously, like I said, the lockdown was a period when there was no distraction, so there's plenty of thoughts, plenty of ideas, and all of that. One of the unusual stories that first came to my mind was Love Bungalow. You know, it's about an aged actor and his shenanigans and his prized bungalow, and I was just like very somehow, like, I've always found this interesting that the homes people, the houses they acquire, people in show business, right, acquire is of great interest to people, you know, and also home is it's a status symbol. It's for everyone, but definitely when you're in show business, because you have to show a lot. You have to show that you've arrived in small ways and big ways. There's a lot of messaging that happens through these acquisitions, through these little things. There is a larger purpose of messaging kind of thing, right? So. So it was something in my mind, and it kind of came together in that time when I was not distracted by film screenings and various other writings and stuff like that. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of spin a story around the idea of a prized, home and the life of an aged, um, well, it's, yeah, like, well, not superstar in this case. He's just an actor. He's not like a superstar, but he's a very well-known personality and a colorful one at that. And give a sense of this is one of the slightly retro sort of stories, because I've tried to keep it more contemporary than dwell too much in the nostalgia of the past. So, but this has a bit of that nostalgia. So yeah, this was the first story that I actually thought of and completed in my mind. Yeah.
And when you give these cues, I mean, that's the journalist in me immediately thinking of who could this be, and I'm not going to get there because, as you said, they are. But again, like these titles, I find them very interesting. Mere paas maa hai, and Thappad ki Gunj, and Pyar Pyar, PR and or Purana Chawal. So all these titles are so. Also, they kind of a takiya kalam in the film lingo. But I would here just dip into the first story, which is the Arty Smarty one. You said that's also one of your favorites. And this is a beautiful story that tells about this hugely acclaimed director. And he's just returned from Cannes. And everybody is like congratulating him, but nobody is ready to work with him. So, and that those little things is what I think you very subtly also say something very profound out there. So was that anywhere your intention, or I'm just reading too much?
No, absolutely. That was the intention in the sense that, like I said, these are simple stories. It's not like rocket science, but human nature is so binary that um, somehow, like, it's important to capture that, and so I've tried to capture the binaries in these stories. My first book was a book called Super Traits of Superstars, which was a motivational self-help book using the examples of Bollywood stars. and which was obviously like, it spoke about their good qualities and admirable qualities and so on and so forth. It was very specific. And but this book is it's fiction. First of all, that was a non-fiction book. This is fictional, short stories. And I thought that fiction is a great place to capture binaries because it allows you that room to kind of go anywhere with a story. It doesn't need to subscribe to an accepted narrative, or an accepted sort of decorous way of presenting something, right? You can just go crazy with it and let your imagination run wild. And that freedom was beautiful. And I thought that it would be interesting because to capture the binaries, put in the nuances, because on one hand, you have a lot of success in terms of fame and critical acclaim and all of that. And this is something that people who work with creative people and with film people would be privy to, because you'll always hear a lot of them talking about all the success that they've got on one hand, maybe in another country or whatever, but it's not the same maybe on home turf, and that right there is an interesting binary, which you hear it in different ways, different times, you see it, and so that story is basically about that irony, and the sort of conundrums that you face. As human beings, we think of ourselves in a certain way. We want to be a certain way. We want to position ourselves the way we want people to think of us. Like, I'd love for people to think I'm superbly intellectual and many other things, right? But may not be the case that people actually see me as, right? And you struggle with that all your life, no matter who you are. It's very rare that, and I think everybody who is Satyarth or you, both of you who've interacted with film stars would know they might aspire a very famous person who's got superstardom and everything else will aspire for critical acclaim. Somebody who has a critical acclaim will aspire for popularity, right? So there's always that thing going on, right? And this aims to capture some of that, yeah.
And also the whole, like, there will be, if that book comes out, so much of pressure before the awards, like people haggling, I want this particular, I don't want in the popular category, I want critical. So, very, just looking at this page, and it would be great if you could read it. This is exactly where about, you talk about the truth around Mirza's film. So, this is the character we are talking about. But just within 5 paragraphs, there is so much given, and I think that's the power of this book. So, maybe from this point,
Right.
where is, they're watching Fellini, they get drunk, they promise this happen, and then this, it would be a good passage too.
Okay. So the truth was that Mirza's films lacked most trappings considered essential for feeding the escapist fantasies of mass Indian audience. No item numbers, no song sequences, and the worst of all, no shoot in exotic locations. And of course, the modest paycheck could have been a factor too, although every actor denied it vehemently. Some time back, Mirza and Ayaz Khan, the reigning god of the marquee, had connected and spent a few boozy nights talking about the films of Fellini, Charles Chaplin, and Satyajit Ray. One night, over many pegs of the finest scotch, after a passionate discussion about the film of the Coen brothers, Ayaz had finally confessed to Mirza that he had been flirting with the idea of working with Mirza for some time. By the time the booze was running out and dawn was peeping in, Ayaz declared with gusto, "Let's do a film together, buddy." They had even agreed upon a subject, a film based on the true story of a forest officer fighting to save the jungles from unscrupulous politicians and industrialists. And in his enthusiasm, Ayaz had promptly called Akash Bakshi, the CEO of a prominent studio, to get him on board. This had obviously made Mirza a very happy man. However, when Mirza sent him the script soon after, there was an inexplicable silence from Ayaz's side. After a few days, Mirza called, only to be told by Ayaz's assistant that the star had left for Bulgaria for 3 months to shoot for his next film. Eventually, after several messages and repeated emails, Mirza was informed that Ayaz's schedule was packed for the next 3 years with back-to-back projects. Mirza had been disappointed and hurt, but eventually reconciled himself to operating at the margins of stardom. However, this time with rave reviews of Shrapnel at Cannes, Mirza was hoping for wider attention on his home turf. And indeed, his phone had been flooded with messages and some rather open propositions of working together. Alas, much to his surprise, when he scanned the newspapers at the airport on his arrival, there were no major mentions in the entertainment section. Mirza's Cannes success had already become a small footnote. Most of the entertainment section was devoted to the blockbuster Chutzpah, a meaningless comedy starring Bollywood star Manoj Rishi, and the actioner Patriot, starring Ankur Srivatsa.
Thank you. So that tells so much, and I think we can just fit in the. I mean, that's something to ask. Like when these kind of wins happen, they really become footnotes, even in the most important papers, whereas marriages, weddings, and all those things. So I would like to now move a bit away from the book, also to you being a chronicler of Bollywood, and that's one question everywhere we are asking: what is happening to Bollywood today? And will it come back? You know, tomorrow we have a topic which says that is South the new Bollywood? Why do you think that has happened? Does this also say somewhere subtly, is Bollywood falling way behind the changing times, or what is your take on the present state of Bollywood?
So I think that's a very deep question actually. I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability. What I've been seeing in the last decade is that Bollywood kind of, it pinnacled, it sort of peaked because it was doing exceedingly well. It was a very commercialized, it became very commodified, if you know what I'm saying, because stardom became that saleable commodity, like more than anything else, right? More than even the great movies that were being made. There were some very good films made. There were some, because the funds started coming in. So the advantage of that was that producers, directors had the advantage of funding these films, the big idea films, if it required extensive VFX or, things like that. They were free to tell their stories in the way that they wanted. So that was very liberating and it was great. But unfortunately, very quickly, that turned into projects with big budgets, and whether it was more like a project which was being mounted than that creative sort of excellence which is required when you make a masterpiece, right? Of course, you can never predict a masterpiece. You can just go with your, gut feel, a great story that's great to you, and you put in all the elements that are required, the best of actors or the most suitable actors and so on and so forth. But when, see, in the earlier days, it was a matter of it was a matter of literally like life and death, because if you didn't deliver on the promise, you could just go bankrupt. It was your own money that you were putting in, right? So everybody, whether it worked or not is a different story, but from the word get-go, at least all the major producers, directors were really like sort of taking no chances. They were giving it their best, right? However, with funding, corporate funding and so forth, I think the lesser degree of risk did not work to their advantage, because then it was like, okay, it's not money out of my pocket. I can go crazy with this and just do whatever the hell I want, right? So there a little bit of that creative sincerity got lost. That's one part of it, which is why it suffered. The second part of it is the commodification of stardom, right? Because stars were always a big deal, but now just being a star, just going anywhere, walking into a shop, walking into an airport, is a saleable commodity, right? That photograph sells. Maybe you're seen at a certain place, it gets you endorsements, so on and so forth. It's a very complicated thing, and that's the market for you, because they felt that, okay, the fame of Bollywood stars can be used to pretty much sell anything and everything, right? So you have them talking about science, about motherhood, about God knows, everything on earth, right? And if they can endorse any product on earth, right? So that commodification, where even let's say a medical sort of congress or conference would involve having a Bollywood star be present, right? Um, it serves no real purpose, but I'm just trying to indicate how people started, at least the market forces or the commercial interests, started viewing it as this saleable commodity and they were willing to pay the price, right? All of this somewhere added, and here, this is more centered on the celebrities within the show business who are faces, recognizable names. So I think what happened with them was that they also started getting a little risk averse because they could earn their monies regardless of the success or failure of a film. And they could stay in limelight, in public view, even if their films didn't do well. Because earlier, films were the only way that they stayed in news, pretty much, right? And if they were popular stars, then of course people were interested in their family life, their kids, the cars they drove, etc. But the primary thing was that they should love you in the movie that you're acting in. Now that was not the case, right? And that has somewhere, I think, combined to give them this setback that we are seeing, where they are facing a lot of, it's not that they're not making any good movies, it's not that. But you're seeing that the South films are doing better. It's not even that all South movies are doing better than indie films, but relatively they are doing much better in the last 2 years, you know, and commercially. And you can see that perhaps these could be reasons that have contributed to it.
I think that word projects is a very important term because I mean then you're working towards deadline and many other things become a part of that. And here I'm reminded about this anecdote in Muzaffar Ali's latest his autobiography. There is a incident where he says this girl from JNU went to Lucknow after seeing Umrao Jan and then came back to him and said, "Sir, where is the Lucknow of Umrao Jan there? I don't see it." And he said, he told her that, my Lucknow was the Lucknow of Nawabs and culture. The Lucknow that you are seeing is the Lucknow of projects. And I think that answers what's possibly happening with Bollywood. But then, we had a phase in the 80s when it had gone down and again it comes back. So every time there is a fall, a rise is bound to happen. I think on that note, maybe we can open up for some questions on the book or anything on Bollywood.
I have a question. Yes. So, my name is Krishna. Hi. So, I have seen, you have seen the cinema industry, Bollywood up close for so many years, and you have been writing for such great magazines and newspapers. So, has it ever occurred to you, hey, I can write the perfect script, the perfect remark, I know what flops, I know what makes a hit. Maybe there's no formula, but somehow I can do it better than most of them. Has it ever occurred to you?
Write the perfect Bollywood film script?
Yeah.
No, in fact, as I got to know the world better, as I got to see the work that goes into making films, I began to have more respect for them, the work that they do, because it's not, when you sit and critique a film, like I would be reviewing films and I was the curator for the Screen Awards, so I'd watch a lot of films and, sort of discuss with deliberate with the jury and so on. And and that process also helped me understand the creative process better because we had a lot of directors, writers, actors on the jury. So it did help me understand the different perspectives. Like when I did this series of interviews with director Subhash Ghai, which was very illuminating because those are like masterclass sort of interviews. And it was very illuminating because he detailed what was he thinking? Like normally as a reviewer or as a viewer, like when you watch a movie and you don't like it, you're like, what rubbish is this? What is this guy thinking? Why did he make the scene this way? Why did he cast this one? Why is this dialogue there? But when I had that conversation with him, I got to understand that, there are, when you make a movie and you are like the captain of the ship, you're not just thinking of course, eventually everything has to dovetail into telling a wonderful story. But you're not just thinking of that one thing. You can't be it's very difficult in the given circumstances unless you have the full might of everybody on the crew backing you to just go completely with your vision. In order to make your vision come see the light of the day, you have to accommodate an actor's expectations, which may not always be unreasonable because he's an actor, he's the one who's going to be saying the lines, he is going to be seen as the face of that film. So he'll have certain concerns. If it's an actor who's very popular, say among a family audience, right? He might think, do I, okay, I have really liked this movie script. I have said yes to it. But now I have to say these dialogues which are very profane, full of abuses. Should I say this? You know, I want to do this movie also, but should I say this? And then you, as a director, as a producer, you might have to take that into consideration and say, okay, maybe I'll, you know, okay, we'll see how we can achieve both. Or it could be like, you know, a particular two actors don't want to be in the same scene together. Now, how do you convince them to do that? Or it could be a particular day that you don't have, you know, if you a particular piece of equipment. Now it's much easier, but back in the day it used to be tougher because they had limited resources and, you know, like the cameras and everything. So how do you do that, right? So all these kind of considerations, they sound very small, but they go into the making of the film, you know, and sometimes you just try to achieve whatever it is that you can, what is humanly possible in the given circumstances. So it's not always possible to be pitch perfect. So in the process, to answer your question, you know, I started thinking about it that maybe we are judgmental very quickly without understanding the complete picture. You know, a bad movie can still be a bad movie, sure, but but there's a lot of work that still goes into it, and so it should not be simplified into, you know, sometimes people tend to write things like, oh, so and so is a loser, what a loser film, or what a, you know, those kind of judgments can be reserved, and it would be better if people understood the entire process before passing judgments or reviewing things, because then it can be more informed and even helpful for people involved. So I don't think I felt that I could do a better job than what they were doing, but I could understand the process better. And I feel that therefore I could assess and make suggestions or criticism or critiques, not criticism. I could critique it better because I had begun to understand the process better, you know. So that I think definitely happened.
But I can say that there are quite a few scripts here. I can see there is a whole anthology on Bollywood waiting to be. They're so adaptable and they're written in, you know, very, as I said, in a cinematic way. Very interesting insights. And as the famous Pauline, you know, once said that even there is something good to discover even in a bad film. And I think once this is my transition has happened when I went from being a film critic to a professor of film studies, and you tend to be a little more humane, and in the sense that you know, there is something there, even in now we are making this new documentary on Ramsey's movie making process. There is so much of passion in it. That is there. They truly believe in that. Any other questions?
You know, I also want to say one more thing about, I mean, thank you for saying that there's a lot of scripts in it. Maybe that came in because, you know, this is my first work of fiction. And because I had been, you know, working on a lot of scripts and story ideas, so maybe that style seeped in unconsciously. And I think in these stories, I felt that conversations were important. So I've put in a lot of conversations which can sound like dialogues, basically to convey the personality rather than descriptions, because these are short stories. So I didn't want to get into big descriptions of a person's appearance or mood or thoughts. It was just very quick. So I thought dialogues might be a better, faster, you know, shorter, snappier way to convey it. And so possibly that's come in. But you know, the Bollywood as a landscape, as a world, is very fascinating. Not, you know, we are obsessed with film stars and everything that they do. So that's one part of it, of course. Their lives are very interesting, not just because they're famous and all, but because they're famous, they have a lot of unusual, crazy situations that they are faced with. Even the whole process of making a film, when you're playing another character, another person, how to get into that process, and also what they face because they're so famous. You know, there's an upside to it, there's a downside to it. Like there was this time I was traveling with an actress, and we, it was the middle of the night. Um, we happened to jump a signal, you know, and so I mean, you know, normally nobody notices, but because so anyway, a cop stopped the car, and so rolled down the windows and did the usual like "Acha kya hai ye wo," and then he spotted the actress in the back seat. So he was like, "Acha, madam, आप हो अच्छा आप बहुत दिन से," and immediately he switched onto this familiar chat, you know, कि अच्छा आप तो आजकल तो आप फिल्मों में नहीं दिख रहे हो, आपको तो काम नहीं मिल रहा है ना, अभी नया क्या कर रहे हो? I was like, dude, that's rude. Like, you know, what are you saying? You know, he just took the liberty of launching into what he thought of her career, and oh, now that you're not busy. What I was like, really, like, why? You know, I mean, please stop it. You know, I was offended for her. You know, and it was funny because you know she was a famous actress of her time. You know, now she was older, so she was not actively there in the movies any longer. But for a person to just take that liberty to me was fascinating. I was like, and that's the other side of fame. You know, people, like I said, there are binaries. So people just assume that because they see you and they read so much about your life, they can take the liberty of just coming up to you and saying something like that. You know, there was this other time when. You know, there was, in fact, well, this is something that Shah Rukh himself narrates a lot of times, and he jokes about it in a self-deprecating manner that, you know, when sometimes people meet you and they're like, oh, but he's not that good looking, you know, in real life kind of thing, right? So they get that a lot of times, even though when we see them on screen, we love them and we're like, oh my God, he's so amazing. And then suddenly somebody will come and, you know, give this quick look over and say, ah, theek hai, he's not that great. In fact, one of the spoofs that he's done with AIB, he talks about it also, how everybody tries to teach him how to act, you know. And he said, I've been acting for such a long time and still I have to hear from people about it. I mean, of course, he said it as a joke, but that's true because people will come up to you, people who are not actors, who know nothing about acting, will come up to you and, you know, give you lessons in acting, what are the kind of movies you should make, what are the films that you should not act in, and what you did wrong in the last film, everything possible. So in that sense also they lead very interesting lives. And also things change, you know. You are at the top of your game, people behave in a certain way. And like I just gave the example of this actress, you are away from the arc lights, people start responding to you in a different way. And that happens very quickly, you know, in show business. It can be very sudden, like you can struggle for years and then fame can come to you overnight or not at all. And those are the, you know, very quirky, unique circumstances which make this world unique, outside of the usual trappings of having a lot of money or just being very famous, and which is what I've tried to basically capture in the book.
Also, that anecdote about giving unsolicited advice, I think somewhere that is also given because people feel like they own you. I mean, parents keep giving us lot of unsolicited advice on career and every other thing. Your friends keep doing that, but that's also the beauty of that fan star, because you know you literally own them, even if it's in a space where you can't touch them. But I think that's also in a backhanded tribute. And since we were talking about Shah Rukh, and there is this whole scene in, it was the end of Pathan, where he and Salman Khan are discussing that I don't think from the present there is no other star, we have to continue. And also we often read that perhaps among the heroines, Devi and Madhuri Dixit were the last of the superstars. Do you think the era of the superstars is gone with the shrinking of the screen, and also become stars being there everywhere?
Uh, yeah, I think it is, it's not that we won't have stars, we will have them. Um, there'll always be somebody will be more famous than the other person, but it will not be as overwhelming and as unanimous and uncontested as what few of the stars in the past have enjoyed, like Devi or Madhuri or Shah Rukh, Salman, Amir, Mr. Bachchan, Dilip Saab, you know, among many others, or Dev Saab, like, because in their time, and also, you know, one of the reasons I think is that life just seems to be moving at a much faster pace. and the demands of the industry are that you need to be like a brand very quickly. And I think that, that thing of being a brand, um, in order to endorse commercial brands, ironically, is one of the major reasons for the death of stardom, because stardom doesn't come just because your movie is a big, one movie is a big hit. It builds over a lifetime. So all these names that we are talking about, it didn't happen overnight. They had their first successful movie. Then, and they also lived their life as it should be lived, as it was, in, well, pretty much in full public view. We saw them fail, we saw them do exceedingly well, we saw their weaknesses, we saw them behave nicely, we saw them behave badly, we saw them in all different shades, right? And eventually the enduring, everlasting superstardom or brand comes from going through the hoops and dealing with it, and and still being able to sort of hold your head up and say, okay, I mean, I didn't do too badly. It can't just come from one successful film, or just by other people saying how great you are. This whole manufactured stardom that we are seeing now, where people, because there's a way to kind of build that opinion, which is the paid media and various other devices to support that. That is not helping stardom at all. If anything, it's kind of, because like people who are resorting to that sort of stardom, obviously they're not putting in the work in doing the actual stuff, and they feel that it's a good cushion, and at some point that will translate in automatically somewhere into this genuine stardom, and that's not going to happen, because okay, for some, like, you would have seen that a lot of times people would be like, okay, like, I've seen this person somewhere, but who is she really? What has she done? Like, I mean, she looks familiar, or he looks familiar, but I don't really know what he or she does, right? And that comes because you're trying to attain a lifetime of fame too quickly and with artificial measures, and that's why it's not measuring up.
And also, I think the times are far more trying because, as you mentioned in your book, in another story, like in the 70s, it was very okay for male stars to have a wife and an affair, and people didn't mind that. But now the scrutiny is far more intense. So perhaps they had more liberating, at least liberal lives. But I think you had a question. You had raised your hand.
I want to ask why 10 stories and we have lot more? Will there be a sequel in the part 2?
So yeah, like now that I've written 10, I have a lot more stories in my head, and it totally depends on the publisher, and but I mean, I would love to write a lot more stories, maybe expand some stories, some characters also, because this was my first work, so I was a little like nervous about it, and I was like not sure, can I do it, can I not do it? But now that I've written it, and I think I'm more sure-footed, because my domain so far, before this book, was largely non-fiction, non-fiction writing. So this was a first for me, and now that I'm a little more confident, having created that world and given it a certain form, I feel that I can definitely add more stories to it, because like I said, and which is a question that you asked me, as did a lot of, especially journalist friends, that is it based on someone's life, whose life is it, and I kept telling them that it's not any one particular person's life, it's the way of Bollywood life. There are some very universal phenomenons, like typically an extramarital affair, for example. Now, you can read someone's life in it, somebody else can read some other life in it. But actually, it's just a universal phenomenon. Names keep changing. So, as a journalist, as an editor, I have seen that because I've gone through the archives. Screen archives went way back into the 1950s, 1951. And even though Screen didn't really cover gossip or personal lives, but I went through the entire archives, right from 51 till the time, like 2000s, and it was fascinating that things we think are happening now and here actually have happened so many times before. And so these are things that are very universal, extramarital affairs, rivalries, all these things, they are like as old as time. The names keep changing, the faces keep changing. Maybe a little bit of the modus operandi keeps changing, but essentially it's in our nature, and it's human instincts that come to the fore. And because Bollywood is a certain way, uh, things transpire. Like if I was writing about the media, the lingo or some of the situations would be a certain way, even in this book, like I have characters who are from the media, because again, that's something I felt later in hindsight, because the media also features so prominently in the lives of Bollywood. It's show business, right? It's show time. So what's the point if you're just doing something in your house and nobody sees it, right? Like you always need your team to make sure there are people to see it. That fantastic act that you're putting on, or that beautiful dress that you're wearing, people must be there to see it. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So either you do it through the media in terms of a press conference, or you do it through your movie, or you do it through your Instagram, right? But it is there for show, right? And that brings about certain very unique circumstances in which you see people behave in a certain way, and that's the world that is there, and you can obviously try to fit in whatever name that you think it is, and which is what is interesting, that when my friends and a couple of people who read the book and they were trying to ask me, is it this one, is it that one, there were different sets of names from different sets of people, depending on who they thought it could be, right? But actually it's everybody's story, it's about everyone who is part of that ecosystem.
So one maybe last question. So you did say that this could be this one, that one, and I know you told me like don't ask me who's who, but can you, if you have to say, okay, you will find perhaps this life somewhere reference in the book, and that will be a good one for people to go pick up the book and just look for them. Any actors or any people who have seeped in? I'm not asking into which story, but
So, like I said, you'll find a bit of everyone, every popular person.
can we take names? No.
I would not like to
Okay.
name someone, not because I can't, but
I'm
because,
just being a journalist here now.
yeah. See, so that's there. Like, journalists always tend to ask these questions. Journalists are always looking for a scoop. But the reason I don't want to, okay, like the name that I can name, but my reservation comes from the fact that it's not someone's life, right? And typically what happens is the media tends to simplify it, saying, oh, it's about this one, which it's not. So it would be misleading, and therefore my reservation. But I have sort of, taken some, it's almost like a doffing of the hat in a way that, in like, for example, Artie Smarty, the directors, there's a shade of a certain generation of directors, like Ismail Merchant, who, who were of a certain, quality, of a certain vintage, of a certain, but it's not about anyone in particular. In my little way, I've tried to doff my hat to different people, um, i- because their way of life was very interesting, and because it's about this show business way of life, you might, so, but you need to be familiar with that. Somebody else, like, could think of some other person, right? So, I mean, that bit about the cooking, good food, because it was like, it's not about him, but it was legendary. His cooking was legendary in his crew, right? So, little thing. So, like I said, it's not his life, but there was something very appealing in in the way that he worked, which has seeped in, right? I was a big fan of his, so I couldn't resist keeping that little bit about cooking, you know.
And I think that's what makes it universal. And because your characters, as you rightly said, they just, the names change, but they keep repeating. The human experiences remain the same. And that makes it also very relatable. And going back to the title, like a folk tale, that we can sit over, retell it, and the and that, and the story goes on. So, any other question, or we can?
I just wanted to add one thing, because it's folk tales. Somebody had asked me separately, like, whether there's any, because fables and folk tales always have a takeaway sort of, yeah, well, Yeah, kind of moral of the story sort of thing. And somebody asked me, does this, like, does this book have any moral of the story? It doesn't really have a moral of the story, but it definitely tells you that survival of the smartest. It's a world where you need to be very smart. That's something that you see. Like, in the people who reach the top, it's not just one thing. It's not just good looks. It's not just it's a bunch of things, but you definitely have to be very smart to navigate the waters. A certain kind of street smart, if even if it's not like intellectual prowess, but definitely street smarts. And I think, yeah, so survival of the smartest is something that I would say would be like, in if one were to stretch it and say it's not really even a moral, it's just a thought, really, because um, it's a very challenging world, very fascinating, very beautiful, um, because of everything that it involves: glamour, great, beautiful people, high stakes success, and all of that. But it's also like very challenging to keep up that level of that hyper glamour, that hyper, and the whole world is focused on you, good, bad, ugly, everything, right? And it's also addictive to a certain extent. When you've lived that life, it's very difficult to move away from it. It seems easy. A lot of times we've seen that in a lot of movies, where there are characters, famous characters, who want to move away, who long for a simple life, to do the regular things, go for a walk, not be recognized, eventually to realize they can't live without it. That's the other irony of this life. You can curse it and you can hate it, and I have no privacy, and people are so mean to me, and they're always analyzing me, and they're like writing rubbish about me, and all of that. But if it were to be taken away, there would be, I think, practically nobody, you know, uh, who can actually live that life. Matlab, once you've lived that life, to go away from it completely is a rare phenomenon. And people who have, now we are seeing that, now that they had that little break and rethink, would like to come back, because you enjoy that profession for what it is.
Film is a creative medium, I believe. A lot of musicians have said everything in Bollywood is copy. We are looking towards South Indian movies. You know, some they are copying South Indian movies or taking rights. So why Bollywood is not experimenting anything new? Every time if you meet anyone, even I had a first hand experience. I was part of script. My novel is on script participation. Totally from admired the writing. When I was working with them, they were like, Kunal ka ye scene tha lechin, Shiva ka ye scene tha lechin. So why you want to take a new scene? And this is something which I see in each movie. I've met so many people around. Everyone who's writing is trying to get inspiration from somewhere else. इसमें ये था इसको यहाँ डाल दो, इसमें ये था इसको यहाँ डाल दो. Why they are not trying to experiment? It's a creative medium.
So, I mean, that's a great question. Thing is, it's show business. So there's the creative part of it and it's business part of it. So what happens is that, and this is a struggle everywhere, like, even in Hollywood, they face similar struggles, um, in terms of the fact that the business side wants the teams or the people to make safe, saleable choices, right? And so, like, what happens when you're talking about copying or acquiring rights of South movies or any other movies? It's like, okay, this is a proven template. This movie did solid business. It's a no-brainer. Iska rights लो and usko banao, remake it with a with a hero or a heroine who works for your audience, and you just make it so it will succeed. That's the thinking. It doesn't always happen. Like we've seen a couple of recent South remakes have not worked in Hindi. Now, so obviously but in business, because there's a business process, right? You have to get your ideas greenlit. The business team has to be on board with it. They have to be convinced that, okay, this is an idea which is worth sinking a lot of money in, right? So if you go with something which very obviously looks risky, it's difficult to get it greenlit at the business level. And I think that's one of the core reasons. We're just going to have a quick unveiling, and Ms. Anu Chaudhary, who's one of the leading names of the Oriya film industry, has very kindly agreed to do the honors. So we'll just do the unveiling of the book, and we can proceed with any other questions and discussions that you may have. So, Ms. Anu Chaudhary, please, I'd like to request you to come on stage. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I'm a bit late. Yes.